Welcome to the Damascus Road podcast. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus and his life was changed forever. That is what we hope and pray for here. Now, on to this week's episode.
Whether you've lived in Tucson for years now or just since August when the school year started, you've likely heard of or even visited some of the very cool places that we have in and around town. Maybe you've been up Mount Lemmon, enjoying the view at Windy Point, or hiking through the forest. Maybe you've walked through Sabino Canyon or taken the tram ride through it. Or you visited the the elephant family at Reed Park Zoo, or my personal favorite, the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, which is like part zoo, part aquarium, part botanical garden, and part like a really cool place to look for scorpions with a black light in the summer, if you're down for that. And maybe Pima Air and Space Museum is something that's more your jam. The SR-71 Blackbird there is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And there's also just beautiful gardens. Like, you might think that nothing grows in the desert, but it really does. If you go to the Tucson Botanical Gardens or Tohono Chul, you can just see all just the gorgeous biodiversity here. And then there's tons of hiking on both sides of Saguaro National Park. There's historical sites and cool art over town. I couldn't even get a picture of everything. We would have taken the whole service just doing that. But one thing that you might not know Tucson for, and that you can literally only see here, is the Titan Missile Museum. It's the last of one of the 54 Titan II missile sites. And during the Cold War, the U.S. set up a series of missile silos around the country capable of launching massive intercontinental ballistic missiles, with the thought that this would act as a deterrent to the Soviet Union, launching any similar missiles at the U.S. or its allies. And all of those sites have since been destroyed except one, which is now a museum that you could actually go into and explore. You can even go down into the silo itself a little bit and see a bit of the missile and the control center where it would have been launched had they done that. And when Tyler and I visited a few years ago, the tour starts with some history of why we have a bunch of giant missile silos tucked away around the country. And it came down to this idea that if both parties are capable of destroying each other, that will act as enough of a deterrent for either one to actually keep them from doing it. And this is called mutually assured destruction. And I remember the volunteer that did our tour was like so casual about this. And he explained the purpose of the program and he very confidently ended with, "And it worked." And the director of the Titan Missile Museum explains it this way. "Our job in the Titan II program was to project a credible threat to the Soviet Union and to convince the Soviet Union that if they were to initiate a preemptive strike against the U.S., we would still be able to retaliate with such force and devastation that it would be suicide for both countries." If even one of these missiles had been launched, it would have meant death for millions of people. And the fact that the system was never used is considered a success. It deterred any sort of preemptive strike by the Soviet Union, and similarly, whatever missile system they had kept us from doing likewise. The threat of retaliation on either side was sufficient to keep two world superpowers from destroying each other, though it certainly didn't do much to improve our international relations today. But we got what we wanted, right? It worked. If you hurt me, I'll hurt you back, and I'll do worse if I can. Retaliation, even the threat of it, seems to be a pretty effective way to operate in a world that can seem at us. And obviously, the threat of nuclear war is on a much bigger scale than what most of us are experiencing. But we see this idea play out in our daily lives too. We hear things like, "Don't get mad, get even," though usually that ends with just everyone being more angry than when we started. We desire justice, for things to be made right, and yet our methods for getting there can sometimes be worse or just as bad than what was done in the first place. We watch and celebrate movies about revenge fantasies like John Wick, where a world that we can enact our own justice, and we just don't think too hard about the consequences of what would happen if everyone is constantly out to get everyone else. And on a personal level, just imagine what it feels like when someone says or does something hurtful to you, when someone lies or cheats or hurts you. We feel it in our bodies. We tense up, we ball our hands into fists, we start breathing more shallowly, maybe we start feeling a pounding in our heads or a churning in our stomachs. There is this very real physical reaction that happens as our bodies try to protect us from the harm that it's sensing. And out of this mixture of physical response and emotional turmoil, it's very easy to want to strike back. I can see when our toddler Joe is getting amped up because another kid took the toy that he wants to play with. I can see his little hands start to become fists, his face scrunches up, his voice gets louder. And if something doesn't change, it's pretty likely that Joe's next move, at best, will be to swipe the toy back, and at worst, that other kid's getting shoved. And even as an adult with a fully formed prefrontal cortex and presumably more emotional control, I can feel this too. A couple of years ago, I found myself in multiple instances of finding out that people I had considered friends had gossiped about me and blamed me for things that weren't my fault, never giving me a chance to correct their narratives or even to hear it from them directly. And I was so angry, and I kept playing out this imaginary conversation with them where I got to tell them just how wrong and unfair they were, and I got to be in the right, playing out this fantasy where I won and they lost. Maybe you felt something like this too. And what about justice on a larger scale? What if we want things to change, for the world to be a better place and more in line with our idea of what is right? Surely, then we need to be the stronger side, the more powerful group, the one holding all the cards that can force our way upon the world. If we let people walk all over us without pushing back, how will they learn? Won't they just keep taking advantage of us? Or if we're not the ones in control, then what can we even do? What power do we have to make things right if that's the case? Shouldn't we try to get justice for all by any means necessary? Yet, as Roxy read for us this morning, Jesus says, don't resist an evil person. Jesus seems to be advocating for passivity, at least the way that we translate and read this verse today. But knowing that his teachings and the rest of the Sermon on the Mount point towards a more expansive narrative that fulfills God's desire for our relationships in this world, perhaps there's more than meets the eye here. Is this simply a matter of whether or not to hurt back when someone hurts us? Or does Jesus have something deeper and better in store for us with this teaching? So let's read through Jesus' words here again. Matthew 5:38-42 says, "You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow." And to get at the heart of what Jesus is saying here, there's a few layers of cultural and linguistic background that we need to uncover that are going to help us out considerably. First, Jesus is referencing Mosaic law here with the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth piece. We read in Exodus 21, "But if there is further injury, the punishment must match the injury. A life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise." In Leviticus 24, "Anyone who injures another person must be dealt with according to the injury inflicted. A fracture for a fracture, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever anyone does to injure another person must be paid back in kind." And this idea that the punishment should match the injury was an ancient one even to Moses. Other ancient Near Eastern law codes, like the Code of Hammurabi, also had this idea. For example, in that code, if a member of the ruling class harmed another member of that class, the victim could enact an equal punishment, say an eye for an eye. And Mosaic law actually took this a step further and applied this beyond just nobles or the ruling class. It says that anyone who does this, so justice could be applied more widely. An eye for an eye or a burn for a burn obviously sounds pretty barbaric to us today, but the alternative in that time was a potentially endless cycle of escalating violence and feuding. And this idea that the punishment should match the injury given set a ceiling on the amount of harm that could be done in return. It's an eye for an eye, and then it's done. And it also helps to know that usually people weren't walking around with missing eyes and teeth and hands from these kinds of punishments. Traditionally, it was monetary restitution that was the standard for bodily harm. A value would be assigned to what was suffered, and then to make it right, the perpetrator needed to make an equivalent financial restitution for that. And importantly, these laws in the Old Testament don't demand that the victim seeks restitution. It just says that if you do, it can't go beyond what the original injury was. You can't keep taking and taking further and further. And there are many instances in the Bible where God calls his people not to pursue retaliation at all, but instead to trust God to bring justice. In Deuteronomy 32, God says, "I will take revenge. I will pay them back." In due time, their feet will slip, their day of disaster will arrive, and their destiny will overtake them. And Psalm 94 says, O Lord, the God of vengeance, O God of vengeance, let your glorious justice shine forth. But Jesus knows that we are not particularly good at trusting that God will enact justice or judging what a balanced response would be on our own. We'd rather do it ourselves and decide for ourselves what is fair and right. So instead of trying to keep placing guardrails around exactly what harm we're allowed to cause, Jesus is advocating for something entirely new here. He says, do not resist an evil person, which today reads as very passive to us. Just let it tap into you and let the person hurting you get away with it. But when we get into the Greek words used here and read it in the context of the examples Jesus gives, we see something very different. Now, we're going to need to do like a quick detour into Greek, which I know for some of you is going to trigger like an immediate response to zone out and just let your soul leave your body. But I promise you that this is actually really important and really interesting to what Jesus means here. So I encourage you to take a sip of your tea or your coffee, and we're going to get into it. So the word Jesus uses for resist is antisthemi, which is a compound Greek word of anti, which can mean against, or stemi, or to stand. So literally the word that we're seeing is stand against, and which is why we get that translation resist. That makes sense. But the specific use of anti in this word is a play on words from the first line of what Jesus says here, connecting his response to that law of retribution. The word anti is what we translate as for, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So it'd be eye, anti-eye, tooth, anti-tooth. So anti is a preposition that can mean in place of or in exchange for, in addition to against. So here Jesus is kind of using it in both of these senses. Though in English it makes more sense for that in exchange for to think of the words like in kind. So the wordplay Jesus is using here with don't antistemi is something like don't stand against an evil person in kind, or don't act against an evil person in the same way that they are acting against you. Jesus isn't saying to not stand up to an evildoer, but rather not to stand up to them in the same way they are doing to you. Essentially, don't return evil for evil. And we see a very similar use of this word anti later in the New Testament as well. 1 Thessalonians 5:15 says, see that no one pays back evil for evil, but always try to do good to each other and to all people. In Romans 12:17, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. And in both of those verses, that for and evil for evil is that same word, anti. Do not give evil in exchange for evil or use evil against evil. And taking this all together, what Jesus is saying in Matthew 5 is not to respond to the hurt with further hurt. Instead, Jesus is expanding the conversation from simply getting recompense for the injury given to focus on restoring the people and relationships in those examples, giving provocative ways to choose restoration over retaliation. And each of Jesus' examples that he gives in this passage are very relational and tied into the particular cultural context that he's speaking into. But that core idea of choosing to stand differently against evil is present across all of them. First, we have turning the other cheek. So in Matthew 5:39, we read, but I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. And often today we read this as, well, don't stop them, just let them hit you again. But there's a lot more here. Slapping someone, both today and in Jesus' time, is usually more about public shaming. And of course it's painful, but if you just wanted to hurt someone, there's like way more efficient ways to do that. Slapping feels demeaning. It's more about the spectacle and what it looks like and how it makes you feel than about just causing pain. And specifically, slapping someone on the right cheek, which culturally would have been done with the right hand, would mean hitting the person with the back of your hand. You might have to like kind of visualize this for a second. If you're Don't know what happened there? Okay. To hit someone on the right cheek with your right hand, you're going to have to hit them with the back of your hand. It has to be like a backhanded slap. And even today, we don't use the term backhanded positively. For example, a backhanded compliment is like an insult disguised as praise, and that feels particularly mean than if you just came out and said the mean thing in the first place. And in Jesus' time, well, an open-handed slap toward an equal would have caused more physical harm, the backhanded slap is what you would use to put someone in their place, to assert dominance and show that they are beneath you. Turning and offering your left cheek to be slapped isn't giving in to them, but inviting that person to slap you again and use an open hand as though you were an equal that they were actually trying to hurt, and not the backhanded slap just to kind of demean or shame you. Once you turn your cheek, the person who slapped you must reevaluate you and what their relationship to you is. Resistance in kind, returning evil for evil, would simply be to slap them back or to scurry away and take revenge at some other time. But Jesus' resistance is to force the other person to evaluate you as an equal. It says, I am not controlled by your attempts to put me in a lower social rank. Writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin put it this way: if I'm not who you say I am, then you're not who you think you are. My honor is not determined by how you treat me. You are deciding who you are based on saying I am lower than you, but I am instead taking my dignity back and forcing you to see me as a full person, rather than simply trying to punish the perpetrator or get back at them for what they've done to you. This act pushes them and anyone who witnesses it to reevaluate their actions and the system around them. And this isn't saying that hurting someone is right and doesn't deserve justice, but instead it shows a desire for freedom for all involved, including the perpetrator. They are trapped in the system or mindset that makes them think that they need to act like this in order to maintain their own dignity or create order, and those chains need breaking too. Sin hurts all of us, including the person enacting it. Jesus calls us to a broader view where that sin is brought into the light through this act, and the true identity we hold as image bearers of God is made plain for all to see. And Jesus continues this into the next example. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. And I think this one can feel especially disconnected from our context today. When we think of a lawsuit, we think of it as something to get money rather than taking away someone's clothes. And even if someone did take our shirt today, that would be weird, but we probably have a few more to spare. But in Jesus' time, most people, unless you were very wealthy, had two items of clothing. You'd have a tunic, which is sometimes translated as a shirt, so that'd be what was worn close to your skin, and then a thicker, sturdier outer garment, translated as a coat or a cloak. And that coat was usually something made of wool and much more valuable because it had to protect the person from the elements and possibly be their blanket as well. In the Old Testament, there were already specific laws around taking a cloak from someone that was meant to protect people from exploitation. If you take your neighbor's cloak as security for a loan, you must return it before sunset. This coat may be the only blanket your neighbor has. How can a person sleep without it? If you do not return it and your neighbor cries out to me for help, then I will hear it, for I am merciful. If you take your neighbor's cloak, because that is the only valuable thing that they have as security for a debt, you have to give it back to them each night. So you wouldn't in good faith sue someone and permanently take away someone's coat in this cultural context. So the picture Jesus is painting here is of a particularly greedy, mean-spirited person who is trying to take literally whatever they are allowed to with this suit, including the literal shirt off your back. And there's also an implication that this person is like trying to hide the evil that they're doing by leaving the coat, thinking, well, that person will cover up with the coat and no one will know that I have taken everything else from them. What Jesus is saying in handing over your coat to will leave you naked with the person suing you holding all your clothes. It would be a very provocative and public demonstration of their greed. Here, if you're taking my shirt, clearly you need it more than me. Have my coat too. Rather than repaying their evil with further evil or simply remaining silent, this act uses generosity to expose both the individual and systemic sin and injustice that allowed something like this to happen. We see a similar idea in Proverbs 25. If your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. You will heap burning coals of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. This is certainly not doing nothing, but instead responding in a creative, nonviolent way rather than retaliating in kind. In both this example and turning the other cheek, you are allowing yourself to suffer in order to stand against evil in a way that very publicly names the sin, pushes against the conscience of the perpetrator and the witnesses, and leaves the possibility of relational reconciliation open should that act provoke a change of heart and action. It's restoration over retaliation. And finally, Jesus gives the example of going the extra mile. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. So in this time, Roman soldiers could demand that an imperial subject could carry their gear. So effectively, they could just force any random person to become their pack animal. Imagine you're going about your day in Galilee, and then a soldier comes up and just dumps his heavy, sweaty equipment on you and tells you you need to carry it for him. You have to leave your work, your family, whatever you're doing, and walk with this man who is humiliating you while carrying all of his stuff. And given how easily this could be abused, even further than it already is an act of abuse, the Roman Empire limited the distance that a soldier could force someone to go to a Roman mile, which is just a little less than our mile today. Like the backhanded slap or taking someone's shirt, there's this undercurrent of shaming and asserting dominance here. Look how much higher I am than you and all that I can do to you because of that. Today, we say someone goes the extra mile just to describe someone who's going above and beyond. But like giving your coat, choosing to carry the soldier's gear for another mile is a subversive act of generosity that redefines your relationship. They are treating you as a pack animal for 1 mile, but once you offer to carry their things willingly, you're redefining the relationship as an equal, even as a friend who is willingly helping another person. Think about who helps you move. Strangers might do it if you pay them, but it's your friends who offer to help of their own goodwill. Going the extra mile turns the relationship on its head from this power over move to a friend giving their help willingly. From I'm humiliating you to do what I need to do and responding with clearly you need help and I'm going to be there for you regardless of what you think of me. And now it's easy to look at this and just wonder, will that Roman soldier actually care, or is he just going to now get to use this person for 2 miles instead of just 1? Wouldn't it be better to refuse to keep him and the Roman Empire from getting what they want? But in all of these examples, the context Jesus is speaking into is not the same as today. He is speaking into a subjugated, ethnic, religious minority group that is under an imperial power that they have little to no hope of changing at a system level. Refusing to carry the gear will only lead to punishment, but stepping out of a system of retaliation and engaging in generosity instead invites opportunity to redefine the relationship. Jesus is offering a vision for how to respond in a way that reflects the generosity and justice of God, that exposes sin and injustice and can affect change at the relational level, which is the level of real and lasting change. Jesus elevates restoration over retaliation. This is a photo from the 1968 Memphis sanitation workers' strike. And each of the signs being held by the men here say, I am a man. And this simple but powerful phrase echoes Jesus' response to injustice, not striking back in kind, but forcing others to see you as a full person with dignity made in the image of God. Jesus calls us to redefine our relationships so that we see the full worth of other people, because violent resistance, whether on a large scale or an interpersonal level, simply will not solve our world's deep problems of sin and brokenness. Only love can. Martin Luther King Jr. puts it this way in his book, Strength to Love, a collection of his sermons. Nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon which cuts without wounding and ennobles the man who wields it. It's a sword that heals. The ultimate weakness of violent retaliation is that it's a descending spiral begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder the hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate, and so it goes on, returning evil for evil, multiplies evil, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. I love that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. Jesus' teachings here are not this sneaky way for us to actually win in these kinds of interactions or to humiliate others in turn. Jesus is calling us to step out of that paradigm entirely and enter instead into self-sacrificial love, truth, and generosity, just as he did for us. Jesus is not in the business of getting eyes in return for eyes, but rather restoring and renewing people and relationships entirely, starting with our very own relationship with God. Romans 5 tells us, "For since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son when we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son." So now we can rejoice in our wonderful new relationship with God because our Lord Jesus Christ has made us friends of God. Only love can make an enemy into a friend, and it is the love of God through Jesus that made us friends of God when we were still his enemies. And it is out of this same love that Jesus calls us to resist evil, not with further evil, but with love and generosity, the same as it was shown to us by God. And in light of this love, how might we broaden our imaginations to think about restoration over retaliation? What is the creative, nonviolent posture of forgiveness that we can engage in where we are not passive, but we are not repaying evil for evil in our world or in our relationships? And at kind of the interpersonal level, maybe we aren't hauling off and slapping other people or stealing their stuff when we feel they've hurt us. And if you are, probably stop. But even if we're not doing that, what are the small ways that we choose to escalate conflict and retaliate against people? Do you get back at others with gossip, by withholding help from them, with subtle jabs and sarcasm, by ignoring them or icing them out? Are we withholding love and pulling away instead of resolving conflict with others? Maybe we aren't retaliating in those big ways, but we often do these small acts of retaliation to make ourselves feel better or victorious over other people without much thought. And while these may feel justified in the moment, we must remember that we are responsible for our own actions no matter what has happened to us. If you think about in sports, it's often the person who retaliates against another player who's penalized, not the one who initiated it. That second player might be responding to someone else's actions, but their choice to lash out is what gets caught. A similar thing happens with kids. One kid might say or do something, the other kid strikes back and escalates, and then they all end up in trouble. And that second child might say, well, their reaction was justified, but they are still responsible for their choice to hurt someone else. We can choose differently. We can choose to forgive when we could get someone back. We can choose to serve when we could withhold help. We can choose to come to the table when we could push away from relationship. We can choose restoration over retaliation in our relationships, even where it feels hard or uncomfortable, because this is where lasting change happens. And this applies on a broader scale too. Where can we work to redefine our relationships to see and treat people as full image bearers of God? Are there people that we try to make ourselves seem better than, that we try to put down or shame or ignore? What could it mean to engage thoughtfully with them instead, to lean into relationship instead of pulling back or lashing out at them? How do we elevate the dignity and humanity of all people, both ourselves and people that we maybe don't like that much, as beloved children of God? And it may start today with simply recognizing that God has already chosen to restore relationship with us rather than retaliating when we were God's enemies ourselves. And in reflection of our own restored relationship with God, in what other relationships might we choose the path of restoration? And I think we can feel hesitant around this idea because, to be totally honest, it feels like losing. I can't imagine that I would be feeling really powerful and reassured in God's love and justice as I was slapped, standing naked before the person holding all my clothes, or carrying a Roman soldier's gear on a hot day. But I also know that it is these very acts of subversive generosity and love in the face of evil that are so powerful in truly changing our hearts. I really appreciate the work of author Malcolm Gladwell, especially his book, David and Goliath. And it's all about that what we perceive as power isn't always real power, and strength can come from unexpected places. In the book, he tells the story of the French town of Le Chambon during World War II. Le Chambon was inhabited by French Protestants or Huguenots who had originally gone there to flee persecution by the state for their religious beliefs. And so while France was occupied by Nazi Germany, the town's pastor preached a sermon that if the Germans tried to make the townspeople do anything that they considered contrary to the gospel, the town wasn't going to do it. The children refused to give the fascist salute in school. Teachers refused to sign an oath of loyalty to the state. And over time, this town became a pocket of resistance in the country. And before long, Jewish refugees, hearing about this resistance, began showing up in the town looking for help. And the town, without a second thought, took them in, fed them, hid them, and helped them escape the country. They didn't physically fight the occupation, and those who were actively helping the Jews to escape were committed to not lying to the authorities if they were caught, as that would have been contrary to following Jesus fully. But their choice to not fight evil with more evil didn't make them any less effective at defying the Nazis. When a Nazi-appointed French official visited the area, the townspeople read an open letter to him directly saying that they were hiding Jews, that they would refuse to comply with any order to turn them in, and literally ended the letter with the line, "We have Jews, you're not getting them," which is just really, really cool. And in the face of terrifying evil, the people of the Chambon found the strength not to return evil for evil, but instead to do incredible good. Their commitment to following Jesus outweighed their fear of the Nazis, and that strength that they found in their faith gave them the power to stand against evil and choose love instead. And while the story itself is amazing, and I highly encourage you to go read it or learn more about it in full, what has struck me since I read it initially is the impact that it actually had on Gladwell himself. He was raised as a Mennonite, but walked away from Christianity in his young adulthood. And in learning the story of the people of the Chambon and other followers of Jesus who were able to forgive and do good in the face of seemingly much more powerful forces, he came to see the power of God and where true strength lies. And he wrote this in an article about his own return to faith. "What I understand now is that I was one of those who did not appreciate the weapons of the Spirit. I have always been someone attracted to the quantifiable and the physical. I hate to admit it, but I don't think I would have been able to do what the Huguenots did in Le Chambon. I would have counted up the number of soldiers and guns on each side and concluded that it was too dangerous. I have always believed in God. I have grasped the logic of the Christian faith. What I've had a hard time seeing is God's power. Maybe we have difficulty seeing the weapons of the Spirit because we don't know where to look, or because we are distracted by the louder claims of material advantage. But I've seen them now, and I will never be the same." These weapons of the Spirit are not weapons that allow us to wound our enemies, but to heal. Ones that allow us to resist evil as Jesus teaches us to. This is what enables us to turn the other cheek, to give our coat, to go the extra mile. The weapons of the Spirit do not multiply evil, but pursue restoration over retaliation. And may we all come to see the weapons of the Spirit that God grants us, the strength to stand against evil with the love that we have been so graciously shown. And I hope that when we follow Jesus in restoration over retaliation, that none of us are ever the same. Please pray with me. Lord, I thank you so much that you help us to see the world differently, that you, over time, you soften our hearts and give us eyes to see the world as you do. Not a world that we need to retaliate, but a world where we can step out of that and see others as full bearers of your image, God. That we are able to stand against evil in the way that you call us to, Lord. I pray that you convict each of us in the ways that retaliate, that are both big and small, that you help to soften our hearts and help us to learn a posture of forgiveness that allows us to courageously stand against, not as the world tells us to, Lord, but as the way you tell us to. Because it is there that your goodness and generosity can be shown to the world. I pray for your strength, for those weapons of the Spirit, that we might stand against evil in a way that does not wound, but that heals. We thank you, Lord. In your Son's holy and precious name. Amen.
Thank you for joining the Damascus Road podcast. Our mission is to follow Jesus together by being with God, loving everyone, transforming people, developing leaders, growing new ministries, and changing the world. You can find out more about us online at DamascusRoadTucson.com.